Welcome. I'm Catherine Terser from Common Cause, Ohio. I want to tell you how much I appreciate so many of you joining us here today to celebrate Sunshine Week. Today is the spring equinox. It is also the 20th anniversary of Sunshine Week. And this is a week that is devoted to thinking about open government and open records and open meetings. It is a week for those of us that are a little bit nosy and for those of us who care a lot about access to information so that we can hold government accountable. And so I'm so glad that you're here. We will be sure to share slides as well as the recording. And then we'll share a doc that'll have all sorts of, links to information because this is a dense webinar with lots of good things to look at. I did want to say a big thank you to the folks who are sponsoring this event. So we are blessed to have sponsorship from the League of Women Voters of Ohio, Ohioans Against Extremism, ACLU Ohio, Indivisible Central Ohio, the Sierra Club, the Ohio News Media Association, the Ohio Families United for Political Action. I have to tell you, I always struggle with OFUPAC. That's quite a mouthful, but it's wonderful to think about Ohio Families United for Political Action. Then we have the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance, Save Ohio Parks, and of course, Common Cause Ohio. So I'm super glad that we're all together thinking about, well, what is it we can do so that we have good access to information, so that we can hold government accountable, and that we can understand kind of the inner workings and decision making that happens behind the scenes. Now, with that, I'm going to walk us through the agenda. It's pretty simple. One, the welcome. Hello, everyone. The other thing to tell you is that we have these wonderful panelists that we're going to talk with. So Natalie Fahmy is with WCMH, that's Channel 4 in Columbus. One of the things that I really appreciate is that she does wonderful work at the Statehouse. She will be joining us very soon to be part of the panel. She is the president of the Ohio Radio and TV Correspondents Association of the Ohio Statehouse, what we used to call the president of the press corps. And then we have Fred Gittes. Now, Fred is an attorney and a wonderful, open records, open government advocate. We also have Alan Johnson. Now, Alan Johnson is a retired reporter, 44 years of experience. Many of you will remember him from the Dispatch. And also he wrote a book called Death and Forgiveness, My Capital Punishment Witness. So we're pleased to have a good discussion about all things open records. I would encourage you all to put questions into the chat. And I know we all have a ton of questions. And then we're going to do just a short kind of tips on public records requests. We'll also talk about, well, how do you actually find court records? We'll go through some resources. Then it's time to take some action, and then we'll do a wrap up. And with that, at this point, we are going to move on to the panel discussion. So what Mia will do is she's actually gonna highlight all of the panelists. It takes a little bit of time, and we'll get started. Please put your name and where you're from into the chat. Looks like we have a great group here, and our panelists, are y'all ready? Okay, on that, I'm starting Alan Johnson. Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. How are public records used by Statehouse reporters? And what are the obstacles to getting information?
Well, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to be here. Got a little bit of sunshine behind me, not a bright sunshine, but a little bit. You keep in mind that I've been out of the direct line. I'm still a freelance writer, but I've been out of journalism for a little while. Natalie can probably fill us in more on the more recent developments, but public records are invaluable to a newspaper, a radio, a TV, any blogger, any kind of reporting, because we really can't function very well without them. Covering all the death penalty cases over the years, covering prisons, covering state legislature, covering former Attorney General Mark Dan. There are a whole lot of circumstances that require public records as the baseline, because we can have all the talking heads in the world, but unless we have records and documents and reports that show us what's happened and who said what, when, and where, we really fall very short in doing our job of informing the public.
Natalie, do you want to jump in and talk a little bit about the importance of public records and open meetings at the State House?
Yeah, public records can be really important for a lot of reasons. They can be smaller reasons, like just finding out if someone's running for governor or not running for governor by requesting a designation of treasurer from the Secretaries of State's office, for example. But on bigger reasons too, you can get personnel files. Sometimes they're several pages long where it details what's going on. In the householder case, we were able to read text messages and really peel back the curtain from what we might be hearing, like Alan said, from the talking heads. Sometimes they talk in jargon, they don't give full details, but it really helps us piece the rest of the puzzle together. Open meetings at the State House are also very important. Not everything happens out in the open here at the State House. A lot of stuff happens behind closed doors. One of the biggest examples is something called conference committee. It's when the two chambers both pass a version of a bill, then they go behind closed doors and they debate exactly how they want it to end up to the governor's desk. That's when you see situations that are a surprise in legislation. It's like, oh, we had no idea that was going to be added, and that's how they kind of slide those things in.
Well, I've always been a little bit surprised about how closed meetings are, especially when the requirements for local government are pretty strict about, making decisions, in open sessions, only going into executive session for specific reasons. And so I've always thought, well, is it because they make their own rules? These are the people that pass the laws. They've figured out, that we don't need quite as much sunshine as others.
I think it's a
Uh,
combination of
Go
making
ahead.
own rules maybe and finding the loopholes in the rules perhaps. So it's like technically you're gaveling in and you're having an open meeting and then, oh, we're just gonna go off and both grab coffee or something like that. So it's kind of finding loopholes in how they do this.
I would find it a hard time doing my job if I were doing what Natalie's doing and I were doing it for the dispatch or whoever, because things have really tightened down
Mhm.
in terms of where you can go, when you can be in meetings, who can be in meetings and who can't. And the surest way to cause an enemy in the press is to prevent them from doing something or to try and prevent them. And unfortunately, that seems to be happening more and more at the local, the state, and the national level. And I, for one, would find that very frustrating.
Well, speaking of frustrating, one of the things I've been really interested in is we have these new house rules. And I was hoping, Natalie, you could tell us a little bit about that and what that means for the public's access to information and access to, for example, protest.
Yes, so it's standard protocol at the start of every GA. So the start of every 2 years, a new set of House and Senate rules are passed. Kind of gives the Senate president and the House Speaker a little bit more control over how they want their chamber to run. But what was really interesting this year in passing the House rules is several of those rules make it more difficult to know what's going on. For example, um, typically, the house schedule would be set at least 24 hours ahead of time. Now we know the house schedule a couple hours ahead of time. Now, we hear rumors, some lawmakers tell us what's going to be on the House floor for like Senate Bill 1, for example. We all had a pretty good idea that that was going to be on the House floor. But it also shortens the amount of time to amend a bill. So now instead of, for example, 24 hours to add an amendment, you can submit an amendment an hour before session begins. So it really opens it up to a lot of these last minute actions. One that's particularly interesting too is there's this new House rule that no one can gather outside the House chamber 30 minutes before or 30 minutes after session. The House Speaker says it's for safety of lawmakers, so they're not getting like accosted by lobbyists, things like that. Who knows what the real reason is, but yeah, there was a really interesting package of House rules that doesn't only make it more difficult for the public to know what's going on, but also in a lot of cases, like I'm walking into Wednesday not entirely sure what all is going to be on the House or Senate floor because we don't have the agendas until an hour or two before it begins.
Well, I know that I find it really upsetting to be in a committee hearing and know that they are accepting amendments and that they're changing a bill and you'll hear what it's about, but the devil is in the details. Changing how quickly you can get amendments and make changes and all of a sudden change session does make it harder for us to be active and engaged. Well, Fred, you've been listening to this conversation and you've been a public records advocate for a long time. Can you tell me, what you think about access to information at this point in Ohio government?
Well, if you were to fix the title on this program, it would be not the Sunshine Week. It would be the Dimming Week. There is less and less access to public records. What Alan and Natalie were just talking about. Now, the legislature has always kind of held itself apart from the open government rules in terms of public records and open meetings. They've never been applied that uniformly to themselves. And I don't want to, I'm happy to talk about the legislative process and give you examples of some horrible things that have slipped through recently, no hearings, nobody knew about it, and it has profound effect on really dangerous effects. But I was involved in some of the earliest versions of the public records bill. There were exceptions because there need to be some exceptions, but there were, maybe a couple of dozen, maybe, and I may be overstating it. Now, as I'm sure Alan and Natalie can confirm, there are hundreds and hundreds if you count all the subparts and the new exceptions. So overall, it's been very, very bad. And while the Supreme Court has varied on its decisions related to opening access to records, it certainly has not been consistently favoring open government access, even though it always has rhetoric in its opinions about how important access to records and open meetings is for democracy. So their actual decisions really don't always fit the rhetoric about them recognizing that it's essential. And we can talk about specifics as much as you want. I just took it that you wanted like a general.
I was hoping for a general. I do know that Alan has a specific example many years ago going to the Ohio Supreme Court. Ellen, you told me that it was something that the Supreme Court said that this should not actually set precedent, but it did.
And it immediately did. And I want to thank Fred because Fred's been around a while, long enough that I dealt with him a lot as a reporter. And thank you for all that you have done and continue to do. The case you're talking about, Catherine, very quickly was the Dispatch. I don't know how long ago, 25 years ago, we decided to have a story annually about who were the highest paid state employees. And we really had no difficulty at first getting the state employees and how much they earned, what their job was, who they were, where they worked, et cetera, et cetera. And it made an interesting list to see the most highly paid ones. That happened. That was okay for a few years. And then the state started redacting things, taking out this and that. And eventually the Dispatch, to their credit, we went to the court and said, hey, state, you're redacting things. What's going on here under the records law? And it did go all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court when the late Thomas Moyer was Chief Justice, and they ruled against us. That case is still on the books, but the Chief Justice said in the ruling, this isn't a precedent. We're not ruling against freedom of the press just in this one particular case. And I swear within a day or two, it was being cited in other decisions pulling back records. So sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes you lose anyway. So and I asked my former boss, Daryl Rowland, who more recently was at the paper and then with TV, and he said they continue to eat away at it, little by little, more redactions, more things being taken away. So it's a battle that you continue to fight.
Natalie, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think that's interesting specifically about the state government employee compensation, because now we have something called Ohio Checkbook, where most state government employees' salaries are posted there. Now, not in full detail. We don't know exactly where all the salaries coming from, if that's including different sorts of work or donations or anything like that. But I do think that's interesting. And sometimes when you do request records, they can be very particular about the wording that you're using as kind of a means to maybe slow it down or not get that record to you. So that's another way that I think some agencies try to give you a hard time. It's just like, oh, we don't have anything with this specific name. You might be a letter or two off or a word or two off. They know what you're talking about, but they can get very nitty-gritty sometimes.
And while it sounds like picky that we would even want to know that, I found, and maybe Natalie has too, is you look at some of these and people are making incredible amounts of overtime, or some of these people are working weekends, or they're on this kind of a paid duty. They're just on duty, even though they may not be on the job, and they're racking up incredible hours, or they have vacation pay or back pay, and all that's interesting for taxpayer purposes. And again, it's unfortunate they're ratcheting back and redacting some of that. It just makes it more difficult for the public to know what's going on.
Well, I was really interested, and this is going to be for you, Fred. I was really interested in the Center for Media Democracy, looking for records from the Attorney General about the Republican Attorney Generals Association. And so this first started in 2020, and the Center for Media and Democracy has been trying to get these records now for 5 years, and it worked its way to the Ohio Supreme Court. Fred, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, I'll try to keep it very brief. The Center for Media and Democracy is an open government advocate group that does its work nationally. The focus of this case is the center wanted to get records of the Attorney General's, Yost's, interactions, communications, visits to various meetings of the Republican Attorney General Association, generals, plural. And it also indirectly involves what is known as the Rule of Law Defense Fund. As many people may have read and been reading, Republican attorney generals who work closely with the defense fund share information. They do joint amicus briefs in very controversial cases, and in many cases that one might wonder why the Attorney General of a particular state is getting involved. Just as an example, Attorney General Yost participated in a case involving General Flynn. Remember when he pled guilty to deceiving, lying to the FBI? Now, in what sense that was of great interest to the Ohio workers and citizens, I never could figure it out, what stake they had. But in any event, so the center requested documents about what the Attorney General was doing, documents and communications that might tell us whether he was using drafts of briefs or in meetings, at their conventions, interacting with businesses or other groups that have an interest in getting attorney generals, and specifically Attorney General Yost, to fight particular battles or to not do litigation about things that they wanted to protect. I cannot possibly tell you everything in this case, as you said, Catherine. Imagine this started in December of 2020. It has just had an oral argument in the case in January of this year. So 4 years into it. The reason this case is, to me, frightening, as somebody who believes in open government, is that the Attorney General has taken the position that, first of all, if you make a public records request, and as he did in this case, he said, what you're asking for aren't public records. And then at another point, we don't have them. We wanted to take his deposition. He refused. And in appealing that, he went to the Ohio Supreme Court, asking to stop our discovery, including his deposition, and also asked the court to change the well-established rule that while a case is pending, you don't have the right to appeal a request for information or depositions, generally. You can appeal whether it should have been done and so forth. And his request to stop all this in the Court of Appeals, the Franklin County Court of Appeals, was rejected. But our Supreme Court decided to take the appeal, which, by the way, can affect every kind of case, because at any time, in any case, a request for a Supreme Court to make a decision about whether a deposition can be taken, and more important, whether every request for discovery can be subject to an appeal that takes, as you can see, years. And to make matters worse, he has asked the Supreme Court to rule that there should be no discovery in public records casing. In other words, we can't question his word. In other words, if he said, well, I don't have any records, you can't take my deposition, you won't be able to challenge whether or not that was accurate. And without getting into it, there's already evidence that there's questions about the veracity. He's also asked the court to limit, if not eliminate, depositions in general for public officials. It's not clearly defined whether that covers mayors, heads of major state departments, but it's certainly intended to cover him and anybody else in a position like that. So just think about the impact of that. Our Attorney General is asking our Supreme Court to say major public officials should not be challenged if they say through a deposition or through other forms of discovery of denial of public records. Our Attorney General is asking our Supreme Court to allow immediate appeals, which has been clear law for years, that general discovery orders, especially about documents, remember this whole case is about getting records, should not be subject to an immediate appeal. And the court decided to take the case nonetheless. And it was argued in January, we don't have a final decision. The interim decision allowing the appeal is of great concern in and of itself.
You know, I can say this now because I'm no longer in the business, but Dave Yost and I used to be friends. We were competitors when he worked for the former Columbus Citizen Journal. I worked for the Dispatch at Columbus City Hall. And I considered him to be a top-notch journalist. I'm incredibly disappointed in David Yost now because he has gone against everything that he believed in and espoused as a journalist. He wants to, as Fred just very well explained, limit the access to public records, and it's shameful. I'm sorry, Mr. Attorney General, it's shameful what you're doing, and it really is shameful that you were a journalist and you know about this and you're doing it anyway. So that's my 2 cents worth.
Catherine, can I add one other thing to the general discussion you had? I don't want to take much time because I know there's lots else to discuss and people have questions. But you were asking about why questions about, how Natalie used and other reporters used the open records law. Here's why it's critical. Because, like it or not, everybody is capable of lying, and everybody is capable of doing dangerous or criminal things. And in my career, many cases have turned on being able to obtain emails, other records, notes of meetings, videos, now, moving forward in time, videos of police officers' conduct. I don't have time to give you examples, but we've all read examples of where officials have been prosecuted because of records that were discovered before the criminal prosecutions, individuals who were wrongly convicted because of records obtained after the convictions that showed a prosecutor withheld information that would demonstrate the person that he or she prosecuted and sent to jail wasn't guilty. And reporters have been ones who've done that. The Innocent Project has used public records to do that. I've used records. Many people have used records. And you can't imagine, other than in an authoritarian system, where people can't even find out what is really going on in the conversations and decision making, not having open government. And to show you how bad it is in Ohio now, and it's not just Ohio, unfortunately, through legislative action that was pushed by a legislator who retired recently, their records can be destroyed. Part of records protection is not just access to them, but preserving them. And it used to be there were serious financial penalties for destroying records. Law requires that there be retention schedules. And one thing is, if a records request was pending, you can't destroy it. And there was a serious financial punishment for it. In some cases, it could be criminal. But I'm just talking about the records. Well, guess what? Now it's cheap to destroy. It costs almost nothing. And the provisions helping people take action about it, because most people don't have lawyers, and it's even hard for newspapers, to spend the money on lawyers to fight these battles. The provisions allowed citizens, working people, to have their lawyers paid if they proved the records were destroyed, or they proved records were withheld blatantly and unjustifiably. That's all been changed now.
Well, this makes me think about last year's House Bill 315. That was basically it was about townships, and was a restructuring about townships. But at the last minute, there was an inclusion of change of public records. Natalie, do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that was one of those conference committee bills. Late, I think session that night ended something at like 2 a.m. That was the last bill they passed. So essentially what it does is it allows police departments to charge news stations for body cam footage and records. I don't remember the exact dollar amount. I think it might be up to $600, but yeah, they just kind of snuck it in there. I believe $750. I believe.
Thank you, Mia.
Yes. I believe it was partially at the request of the Attorney General Dave Yost, to
Yes.
get that to get that provision in there. The bill technically is not in effect yet, but I do know that, some police departments are already kind of trying to enact that policy. And I don't think every police department might not enact it, but it at least gives them the option to charge anyone who is requesting things like body cam footage that can be critical in reporting in cases and in just public consumption, to hold these departments accountable. Now it comes at a much larger price tag that can sometimes be unattainable.
And we're
People
talking
should.
about an electronic record, like
Yes,
like something where there shouldn't be a cost for that.
Right. They say
Well,
the cost is the labor and the number of people it takes to process that request and the number of hours it takes to process that request. But uh, in some cases, if there's like 17 hours of body cam footage, like for example, that shooting that we had in Columbus a couple weeks, maybe a couple months ago at this point, well, there were hours and hours of body cam footage. So how long is it going to take for us to go through that and redact things and train it together? That sort of thing is kind of their defense for why they need and ought to be
well,
charging.
Natalie, let me just, because I'm directly involved with this a lot. First of all, their justification for it is not only the time, but they're required to redact some portions. For example, a victim. You're not necessarily going to provide name and information on a victim in some cases, especially depending on what is shown. They have to go through these before when they're initially requested to see if there's any information or images that have to be redacted. But also it's not uncommon for there to be 2, 3, 4, 5 police cruisers called to a scene. And you have cruiser videos, and you should have, but as I've learned from experience, I don't want to use the convenient word, but mysteriously, some officers never turn on their body cams. But you have cruiser videos for a single event, and you have the body cam videos. And so am I defending the charge? No. What I'm pointing out is that even law firms at times have to spend a whole lot of money that is very costly. You have to make choices, and reporters and newspapers and certainly citizens like advocacy groups or neighborhood groups that want to find out what really happened. It will cost an enormous amount of money, and you pay $7.50 for each item or each video. So when you think about how many officers and other individuals, rescue, emergency vehicles show up, you're talking a lot of money. And as you said, I think everybody should be protesting this. There was no hearing on this. Nobody knew that it was being slipped into a bill in lame duck. My understanding, I agree with you, my understanding is Yost was involved in doing it, and he was able to get a House of Representative member who has a history of being pretty hostile to public records. And I will shut up. Thanks.
Well, I have to say, I have appreciated this conversation. So one of the questions that we received had to do with this question. Given the diminishing funds available to media organizations to litigate public records denials and the daunting challenge of pro se filings and mandamus, is it time to mount a dedicated public records training and case coordination effort using the Affordable Ohio Court of Claims remedy?
Well, I'll just jump in. I've been impressed. I had my doubts about the Court of Claims court to handle public records, but so far I've been very impressed overall. It's speedier. It doesn't cost as much money. Citizens are really guided and helped in processing it. But two caveats. One, I really respect the person who has been selected to hear most of these cases, extremely knowledgeable about the act, and as it should be, is committed to open government. That's, you would expect that of every public official. The other caveat is for certain kinds of complex cases, certainly some of these major scandal cases, or police violence cases, or major government theft cases, or discrimination cases. We handle a lot of civil rights stuff. You can't rely on the court of claims process because you don't have, well, subject to what the Supreme Court does in our case, you don't have the full ability to use depositions and other discovery and do appeals.
Well, one of the things I also thought that we should quickly cover has to do with those kind of quasi-governmental entities like Jobs Ohio. Ellen, is that something you want to jump in, or Natalie?
I haven't, Jobs Ohio was not in my bailiwick, so I'll shuffle that one off to Natalie if she knows anything about it.
Yeah, it's one of those, like you said, quasi-governmental groups. They are heavily involved in getting funding from the state, but they're not records requestable, which is really interesting because I think the presumption is that if you were even quasi-governmental or getting money from the government, you should be records requestable. But they did just get a brand new contract from lawmakers to continue on and secure millions of more dollars in order to keep doing the work they're doing. Behind the scenes, we really don't know what's going on. Out front, Governor Mike DeWine will say Jobs Ohio was critical to bringing investments to Ohio, like the Anduril, that defense weapons company that just invested billions and billions of dollars in the state. So that's kind of what Governor Mike DeWine says that the organization focuses on, but again, it's very shielded, very guarded. We don't know fully exactly what they're doing. You can go to their website and kind of see different meetings and some different line items and spending line items, but it is fairly limited.
Catherine, a minute ago.
There's even a question about whether they were subject to the open meetings laws. You probably remember that. There are some application of open meetings laws, but it's not as robust as the others.
Catherine, I was just going to say in response to your general question a few minutes ago about the impact of this, I compare it to what happened with voter suppression. If you do all these things to suppress the vote, you're going to have less votes. If you do all these things to suppress records, you're going to have less access to records, which I think is where they're going. So that's the equivalent to me.
Well, we've talked a lot about some pretty depressing trends. I was thinking about Fred's, the dimming of that sunshine week. One of the things I am interested in is like, what are some good public record stories? Where is there that little bit of glimmer of sunlight? So Natalie, do you have one?
Sure, I probably have a couple. I did a story a while back, maybe a year or two ago, about Frank LaRose moving his office, his official Secretary of State's office, to the same building where he's running his campaign from. Technically not illegal, a little bit fuzzy. However, I was able to records requests and get sort of all the other buildings they were considering, how much they cost, whether this was actually the most cost-effective building, that sort of thing, because they might give you a statement where they say, yes, this was the best option for everyone and for taxpayers, but when you see the records and you do the math, how does it actually add up? Another one was former state representative Elliot Forehand. He ended up losing a lot of access to the Statehouse and was accused of being hostile towards staffers, other representatives, constituents. He you know, we were able to records request that personnel file, and there was a very extensive personnel file with a lot of details about some of the things he was saying and some of the things he was doing. The only caveat I'll say is as journalists, we kind of need to, you know, protect the truth and only put out there what is meant to inform the public and be helpful to the public. So sometimes in those lengthy personnel files, for example, not everything makes the cutting board floor, I think maybe. I mixed that saying up. Anyways, but a lot of it is helpful to at least inform our reporting and tell the public what they need to know from it.
Well, I have to say my favorite public records request, people will appreciate it. This was in 2012. So it was after the 2011 map making. And it was because of that records request to get all of the records from like, well, how is it they made those 2011 maps? And you'll remember the snake on the lake, and you'll remember the Jim Jordan's Duck District, and just, you know, just this really convoluted map that made no sense. And boxes and boxes and boxes of records. It felt like my office was small, like it filled the office up. But this is how we discovered that, in fact, they called the hotel room that they made the map in the bunker. We learned they moved district lines for a campaign contributor, basically for the Timken plant and the Timken family. You know, we learned basically that there was orchestration. Team Boehner was orchestrating a lot of things, and that there were national experts that were urging them not to share any information, which is kind of funny to get a public records request where it basically said secrecy is the watchword. I have to say, I was so grateful that we were able to get those records because we better understood what we were up against, and we were able to tell a story about really how egregious the manipulation of those voting districts is.
You know, Catherine, I'll add also to maybe dent my gloom. People are still every day of the week, and we and a lot of other attorneys I know who are into civil rights, we are still getting public records requests filled, maybe not as fast as we'd like. Using the police as an example, we're still getting records that help us decide whether someone was violated, falsely arrested, abused. Now we're not sure what's going to happen in terms of video, but it's going to cost money. But at least they didn't remove it as a public record, which is, I'm not being sarcastic. It's a good thing. You have to worry about what might come next. So on a day-to-day basis, for the most part, reporters, I believe, and I get calls from reporters, and in my work and the work of other attorneys I know, we still can get critical documents, even some that sometimes surprise all of us, incriminate government officials or prove they failed to fulfill their duties.
All right, well, this is the point that we're going to wrap up this panel. We'll do a quick overview of public records requests. So Mia, if you'll move the slideshow on, what I'm hoping is that Ellen and Fred and Natalie will provide some suggestions as well. So now, Mia, if you'll pull that up, here it goes. So one of the things I think that is so important about, you know, public records access is that we have to actually take advantage of them. And there are some wonderful resources out there. They used to call it the Yellow Book. I highly encourage you, you know, to order the Sunshine Law Manual. It is well worth looking and seeing what's there. It's also worth doing one of the trainings that the Attorney General has. And then the ACLU has an updated version of Keep Your Eye on Government. And so this really walks you through all of the different things that make public records requests go smoothly. I included, it's on the left, just basically they give you all sorts of like suggestions, even for what to write. I think the biggest tips that I would give is, have a really clear goal for what you want. It's often helpful to identify if there is a public information officer so that you have a person specifically to go to, because often if it's an elected official, it can get lost in all of the other requests that are coming in. So look to see if there is a public information officer or kind of an administrative person that can help you. You do not have to tell folks why you want the records, and you actually don't have to write a letter or send an email. It just ends up being helpful to be able to track it. But if one of the things I've often done is I've made a phone call to, a public information officer before I do the records request, just to let them know that it was coming. I highly encourage, couple days after, make sure you make a phone call. Hey, did you receive it? When should I expect it? Because there are no rules for like how long, how long they have. It's How can I put this? It's worth being kind. That whole thing of you get more flies with honey. And those are the kinds of tips that we have. I wanted to see if like Alan or Natalie had some suggestions as well.
You're muted, Alan.
I have to say, muting is always, it's a little bit of a challenge. I think we've been using the Zoom for now for 5 years.
Am I
And it's
okay
still,
now?
there we
Yeah.
go. We can hear
Okay.
you.
As my friend Randy Ludlow, who we call the records ranger, if he were here, he would say one of the hints is to be very, and you mentioned it, Catherine, be
Mhm.
very specific about what you're asking if you can, because I don't know how many records I've received back a records request, or he did, where they said, we have no records responsive to your request. That doesn't mean they don't have it. That just means you didn't ask specifically enough for the record that you're looking for, that they can send back a bluff like that without having. So you have to be pretty specific if you know and can be.
Mhm. Well, one of the things that I so appreciate, Randy Ludlow, who is a former reporter, old school muckraker, has agreed to help folks so that if you are having difficulties with a public records request, he is available and is offered to, share his email. And so I wanted to be sure that you knew that, and we'll include that information in the follow-up as well. And with that, I'm actually going to hand this over to Jessica. And this is Jessica Dickinson with the Ohio Fair Courts Alliance. Thank you, Jessica.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being with us tonight. Sometimes I think the Ohio Supreme Court can seem maybe off limits to the public. So I wanted to emphasize the fact that the public does have tools to find cases and court information. So here are 3 ways to search for cases. The first one, you could go to the Court News Ohio's headline section. There you will find a list of recent and archived news articles about Supreme Court cases, as well as articles about other Ohio courts. And I really like this search tool because it's quick and easy. You can also search the Ohio Supreme Court's website for opinions and announcements. Announcements are documents that are released to the public that reflect the recent actions taken by the court. And the third option is to do a public docket search. That's also found on the Ohio Supreme Court's website. And I'm going to walk us through a quick tutorial on how to do this kind of search. So next slide, please. So you're going to go to the Ohio Supreme Court website and click on public, and then click on case docket. Next slide, please. You can see here that there are several search options. If you don't know the case number or case caption, you can choose one of the other 3 search options provided. Next slide, please. So, you go, oh wait, I don't have any of this information, but I want to know more about last year's Ohio Supreme Court ruling on boneless chicken wings. Side note, if you aren't familiar with this case, the court ruled that chicken wings advertised as boneless can in fact have bones. But you could just do a general Google search like the example here and find things like the case name or the parties' names. And many times these kind of searches will bring up the actual decision from the Ohio Supreme Court. And you could just go back to the docket search and put in any information that you found. A case docket includes all of the actions taken in the case, including previous rulings. Next slide, please. Oh, you've got it. So I know this was just a quick run through. The court does provide a case search guide for everyone to follow. We have the link here to that. And I'm going to send it back to Catherine. Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of resources out there, and I just wanted to highlight one that Natalie mentioned, which is the Ohio Checkbook. I also, there's so many things where it's really interesting to get a picture of what happens in government, and that is, going to hearings or meetings. The Ohio Channel has hearing sessions of the Statehouse. It's well worth checking that out. You can also watch a hearings of the Ohio Supreme Court. I recently watched the one that involved the Center for Media Democracy because I was super interested in the kinds of conversation that happened. You also, I highly encourage you to check out all the information that is available on the Statehouse pages. And then there's good lobbying information as well. There's campaign finance information and business filings. We talked a little bit about the Court of Claims. And then I also want to highlight, if you're running into trouble, we want, finding a record or with a records request, we want to be helpful. So please send me an email. We want to be there for you. There are just so many kind of sunshine resources. I want to encourage all of us to take advantage of it. And with that, we're on to this slide. Is just a really simple one. One of the things that I always think you need if you're going to focus on kind of transparency and what you want in government, it's helpful to have just a sense of where are we going? And so these are the kinds of transparency efforts that I've been thinking about. I've been thinking a lot about, and Common Cause has been pushing and advocating for better access to information from the Legislative Service Commission. Obviously, we want to be able to follow the money in elections. We need greater transparency when it comes to lobbying. And so think about kind of the Generation Now ads that were lobbying the public. In other states, those ads that lobbied the public to support House Bill 6 in 2019, in other states, there would have been a requirement for that information to actually be disclosed. Obviously, we need greater transparency at the PUCO. And then I just think we need greater access to information on those ethics filings as well. And we should be able to follow the process. And then finally, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the follow-up to House Bill 315. We know that police departments, city officials are making decisions about whether or not they are going to charge for those body cam footage. So we know Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus police departments are not going to charge for that footage. And what we don't really know, well, what about all of the other locations? So if you are not in the big, the big 3C, I'm going to ask you to take some time to try to figure out in your own community what's going on with the police department. So our friends at OFUPAC are compiling this information so that we can understand where we need to put pressure so that we can get good public information. Now, I realize this is, very, like, hey, Google your police department, see what they have up, make a phone call, see what's actually happening, and then send that message on to OFUPAC. But I also know, it's easy to run into problems. So please, send us an email. I'm cturser@commoncause.org. or you can join us at Common Cause Ohio office hours. We do them Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. And so what we'll do in the follow-up, we'll share the slides, we'll share the recording. But this is the kind of project that makes an enormous difference. And we really need so many people to come together to actually get the job done. And so I encourage us all to take action. And with that, it is almost 7 p.m. I wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated today. A big thank you to the sponsors. A big thank you to the panelists. There were so many questions and directions that we could have gone. And one of the things I do know is, how can I put this? Often we'll get to the top of the hour and we'll know that I wish we talked about this area or that area. I wish they got into this question or that question. Sadly, we couldn't get to everything, but if you have a question, please send it to me and we'll be sure to follow up, try to find information for you and get back to you as soon as possible. So big thank you to Natalie Fahmy. Big thank you to Alan Johnson. And I have to say, I'm so appreciative of Fred Gittes. It made an enormous difference. And then Fred, did you have a final thing you wanted to say?
No, I'm just glad so many people joined us.
And what about you,
We
Alan?
need more eyes everywhere.
We do. We need more
especially in the
eyes.
legislature.
I only have one question for you, which I wasn't aware of. Is there a Jim Siegel Disclosure Act? I saw it on your slide.
Oh, so it exists in my dreams at the moment.
Okay.
So
Jim
like,
Siegel was a former colleague of mine at the Dispatch, who unfortunately we lost a few years ago, and he was a worthy successor to Lee Leonard as the very diligent, hardworking, hard-nosed Statehouse reporter. And Jim was one of a kind, and I saw his name on there, and I'd love it if there were such a thing.
me too. And it's one of those things where I often think we don't always get where we want to go, but if we want a vision, and I just thought, Jim Siegel, he was somebody that was such a good advocate for open government. I just thought it would be a really wonderful way to honor him. And so I have been pushing at the Statehouse for 4 years for this act. We're not making a lot of headway, but often that's the way it works. It takes a little bit of time, and we know that the headwinds are a little against us.
Well, thank you. Thank you for remembering Jim.
Yeah, I thank you too. Catherine, may I say one other thing? I don't know who's the people listening to this, but whether you need the help or you know people who want to do Public Records Act, there are so many excuses that the government entities use, whether it's a county level thing, a school thing, whatever. Use these resources that are being provided here, or talk to a lawyer who believes in public records. You have to request it in a certain way under court decisions. If you don't, they'll delay, and most people give up. They don't know how to get around it. So take advantage of these great groups that are willing to work with people.
Persistence, right? Persistence.
Absolutely.
And also any fight for good records is worth doing together, because otherwise it gets too hard. And Natalie, any final words?
Just we'll keep watching the state lawmakers and the state executive office holders and trying to uncover what's going on around here. Myself and our wonderful Statehouse press corps.
And call you when we find it out, right?
Mm-hmm. All right, a big thank you to everyone. Make sure to look up your police department and make a phone call and let us know. And we'll do a follow-up tomorrow that'll have all sorts of information. And, please touch base if you need anything. And with that, thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye.